Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to business continuity, resilience, emergency management, crisis management, anything that can help you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn. I am the only Alex Fullick there. I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. Today, we're going to talk about stress and how it contributes, and mastering stress and how that can contribute to our resilience. Because I'm really happy with today's guest. I've tried to get her on the show a few times, but so busy, it gets difficult. But she has been on the show twice before for live broadcasts at DRJ Fall. And I'm really happy to have her here because she was my very first live broadcast guest. And I want to
Yay.
welcome to the show today, Dr. Heidi Hanna. Heidi, welcome to the show.
Hello. Well, thank you. And it's not like I'm that hard to get on the show, but I think, as we all know, the last few years have been a little chaotic. And so, in
Yeah.
addition to what, we've all experienced, I've moved 3 times. I'm not going to give you the list of everything, but let's just say it has been a whopper of a few years. So I am now settled and moved closer to family and feeling really good, excited about the new year. So excited to talk with you. As I mentioned before the show, you're always so fun to talk to. We don't even need a script. We can get into, the fun details around my favorite topic, which is stress, which sounds a little
Mm.
strange, but people will probably understand why as they listen to us chat about it.
Well, I like talking about disasters and things like that. So, hey. Well, now I know you and I know a little bit about you. Could you just take a minute and tell our global listeners and viewers a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how you got into what you do?
Sure. I wish it was a simple linear path, but it's not. If you ask my parents what I do, they probably couldn't explain it either. So it's not always easy, but I would say that, especially over the past 20 years or so, I have really focused my research and teaching and speaking for organizations and consulting with companies on the impact of stress and mental health in the workplace. So, as you mentioned, the Disaster Recovery Journal, I've been blessed to speak there now 3 times as a way to kind of incorporate what I've learned in integrative neuroscience and really looking at the physiology of all of us individually and collectively. And I love to kind of brainstorm around that. We talk a lot about training practices and procedures and things like that when it comes to disasters. But for me, I always like to go back to the basics of who is the person and how is their brain and their body going to react in any given situation. So we can have all the training in the world, but if they're hijacked by stress that could have to do with the disaster or could have to do with their job, their family, their finances, a recent illness, I mean, the list goes on and on. Um, how are they going to be able to actually bring all of those resources to the moment that they need it most? So I'm fascinated by all things stress. And I often say, usually not at the beginning of the training, because people would probably leave and think that I was crazy. But I do believe stressing is a blessing once we know how to use it. Stress is a powerful force that we feel within us. Again, individually, also collectively, it's very contagious. It can be addictive. But really, it's pointing out what matters most to us. And so, if we can kind of get curious about it and lean into it, I believe proactively and kind of explore our relationship with stress, then we can train in ways that in that reactive moment, we can be more effective. And so to me, it's really a universal, conversation, but I can't imagine a space that it is more needed than disaster recovery, resilience, those types of conversations.
Hmm. And the opposite can be true too. You said stress can be contagious, but if you're a positive person, that can also be, if you manage your stress, let's stay on the topic, I guess.
That's
If
right.
you manage your
Yeah,
stress properly, you actually make that contagious as well to other people.
Right. Without sounding too woo-woo,
Yeah.
it's all energy. So everything that we do, and what's fascinating in the neuroscience research is that we can now see kind of brains in action based on blood flow and different things, what we're picking up on and how that impacts us, to what level, to what depth kind of within our body. And so I really tried to focus on simplifying what can seem to be complicated concepts, because really, when you break it down, we've been talking about this stuff for so long. There's so many traditional spiritual practices around breathing, meditation,
Mhm.
physical exercise, nutrition. It's really not anything new, but I think the new part is, how do we make those part of a process, a procedure, something that's corporate potentially, so that we're really building human capital. And I'm going to step back for just a second. I always have a tendency to gloss over this because I find myself boring. But you asked what got me into this, and I do think that that's important, because when I was very young, about 10, 11 years old, I started having really bad panic attacks, and it would cause me to actually faint, to lose consciousness. And so it's very confusing. So we started looking at different doctors. They thought it might be epilepsy or some sort of seizure disorder. And it turns out that I have a condition that actually maybe about 5% of the population have, called vasovagal syndrome. And the easiest way to understand, it's kind of like a reverse panic attack, actually. So when most people have anxiety, they have high heart rate, shallow breathing. There's an intensity of that puts them on high alert. Well, in vasovagal syndrome, it's the opposite. So blood vessels dilate, pull to the feet, which then cause the brain to need more oxygen, and which is the reason we then faint. Now, having said that, everybody goes, oh, like fainting goats. Well, kind of like fainting goats. I mean, there's this intuitive reaction that if we can't do something with our stress or anxiety, the best thing to do is actually conserve resources, in a sense, kind of play dead and wait for the emergency to be over. But you can imagine, especially as a child, that's a very maladaptive reaction. So it made public speaking, flying, going on dates, doing interviews, everything was felt kind of traumatic for me. So in my exploration, I looked at everything. I studied psychology, nutrition, physiology, and then was blessed to work with an organization where we really looked at the energy system as a whole, the Human Performance Institute. So it was the first time where I felt all the pieces were coming together. And then about 20 years ago, the neuroscience research was kind of catching up to what we always knew it was true through physiology, but we couldn't really look into the brain and how the brain was changing our patterns of energy expenditure based on kind of what we were dealing with at the time. So that's when I kind of left what I was doing there, looking more at the body mind connection, and really started looking at the body and how it includes the brain and the nervous system and all of those types of factors. And it's been a lot of fun. I continue to do research. I continue to teach at a university level, and I still do a lot of speaking and writing as well. But I will tell you, the biggest change for me is really, really thinking seriously about how I model that, in being so adamant about my own recharge practices. And I'm sure we'll get into what some of those are as we go along.
Mhm.
But I think a lot of people talk about it, but then they still continue to kind of be on this, in this rat race, or the hedonic treadmill, as we talk about, just go, 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 go. And when we try to relax, it's actually super uncomfortable. So we just get back to it. We tell ourselves we'll take care of ourselves later. And that's where stress actually starts to become really dangerous for us.
Well, that leads me to my first question. What is stress and how does that impact us?
Yeah, it's a super important question, and one that I think a lot of people don't ask themselves. And the reason it's so important is because a lot of times we feel the pressure, the tension, the anxiety, or the worry, whatever the actual symptoms of stress are, and then we just put it all into kind of a catch-all stress bucket. How are you feeling? I'm stressed. But it doesn't help us to resolve it. So it just builds up, and it feels like it's outside of us. And when that happens, we don't have control, we don't have choice. It starts to become debilitating. So I think a simple way to think about stress is that stress is what happens when demand exceeds capacity. So it's a simple concept, and it could be physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, social, financial, organizational. Anytime we are being asked to give more than what we have access to, there's going to be a gap between demand and capacity. And so, in a sense, our stress reactions help us to bridge the gap temporarily. So, if I'm physically feeling stressed, my immune system is actually going to be enhanced for a short period of time. My focus and attention is going to be enhanced so I can problem solve. We might even feel more pain, which is a good thing, right? So that we can start to identify where the problem is. But all of those symptoms are designed to help us. When it becomes an issue is when the demands of that gap continue and continue and continue. And so I like to think about two different types of stress. We have the acute in the moment, which in a lot of ways, disasters, I mean, they can last for a long time,
Hmm.
but many of them are short term as far as the actual threat goes. Now, the recovery process can take a really long time, but oftentimes it's like in the moment, disaster happens, and we're really focusing on how do we rebuild, repair, recover, all of that kind of stuff. So, in the moment, stress is good for us. We have adrenaline that helps us to have more energy, to focus, to pay attention. You could think about giving a presentation, or even, if there's a fire alarm that goes off and I need to run out the door, that's a positive thing. The issue is chronic stress. So every day when I wake up and I feel like there's not enough time to get it all done, or, the holidays are coming up, or, an anniversary is coming up, and I just feel like I'm not doing well in my life and I don't want to have those conversations, or, whatever it is, it's the stuff where we don't feel like we have control, or it lingers on and on and on. That's where it becomes toxic. And so there's actually beneficial stress, there's tolerable stress, which means I have this demand, but I'm either going to minimize the demand or increase my capacity to meet that. And there's this oscillation that goes back and forth, which is actually where we want to spend the majority of our time. And then there's the toxic stress, and that's where it's lingering for too long and causes all the other parts of our lives to feel more demanding than they actually are. And when that happens, unfortunately, it causes a huge cascade of complications, again, physically, mentally, emotionally, and all of that. Some of the basics are an inflammatory response in the body. So research has shown us that 75 to 90% of all medical visits are actually stress related. So it doesn't mean they're
75 to 90?
75 to 90%.
Wow.
Think about the major issues that are out there, right? Cancer, diabetes, dementia, Alzheimer's. A lot of these things are actually increased. So they may start as, and it turns out actually, we all have precancerous cells in our body. They're just cells that aren't working the way that they should. And with a healthy immune system and good energy management, we can be okay with that. Life goes on. Same with a brain injury. We now know that people could have a brain injury, whether it's from emotions or physical contact, and the brain will rewire, repair itself to navigate around that. But the issue is, if the recovery and the repair doesn't happen, which usually it doesn't, the inflammation builds and builds and builds. And so it's almost like putting, a stimulus or steroids onto something that's already bad for us. And obviously, you can look at things like obesity epidemic, how much of that is connected to stress issues that not only cause behaviors like overeating and underexercising, but also actually change hormonal patterns. And stress hormones actually tell the body to store more fat because it believes that an emergency is actually happening and we need to be able to have more of those resources. So the list goes on and on. And of course, when it comes to organizations, performance goes down, focus and attention goes
Mhm.
up, down. Essentially, and you've probably seen this in some of my presentations, if you look at how the brain operates, we become hijacked by that survival-based programming, and we're not able to think flexibly, logically. We're not able to think about resources we have. We're not even able to think about the fact that 3 years ago we dealt with something really difficult and it was hard, but We got through it. We have the capacity. We have people we can reach out to. So the idea is not that we remove the stressor, which is the thing that happens. And obviously we can't with most of the things that you're talking about with disasters. But what we can do is train the system to be able to deal with it more effectively. And it's not just, again, the kind of mental training we do, but more so the emotional capacity to cope, to actually be able to stop in the moment, take a breath, and then think with the part of our brain that has all of these memories and all the trainings that we've done to say, okay, what would be the next best step? We don't have to solve the problem. But an interesting thing about stress is as soon as we take the next best step, it releases its hold. It becomes like more of an acute situation. Now we have choice and we can actually, elicit some sense of control. Even if we can't control the big picture, I can control that in an emergency. I know what I'm going to take. I have a go bag, whatever the case may be. But other people in that situation, overwhelmed with stress of the rest of their lives, can just essentially short circuit. And that's where it becomes, dangerous to everybody that's involved.
It sounds so easy to, we can't control the circumstances that impact us, but we have 100% control over how we respond. But why is it so difficult then? Because if we can say it that simply, why can't we do it that simply?
The thing that comes to mind, and I'm not sure I've ever put it this way, so hopefully it will make sense, is that we have trained a reactive avoidance system for the majority of our lives. Reactive meaning we feel the reaction and we either kind of snap or we avoid it. So it's that kind of fight or flight response. I'm either
Mhm.
going to attack what's attacking me or I'm going to run away from it. Interesting side note here, and I know this isn't what you asked, but in the male brain pattern, and by the way, this isn't gender related. There's different male and female brain patterns. Some women have a more kind of masculine brain pattern. This is influenced by the stress hormones like testosterone and estrogen, and it's a whole nother topic. But something we don't often talk about is the female brain pattern is actually not fight or flight, which we talk about the majority of the time. It's tend or befriend. So when a female brain pattern is in stress, their tendency is not to run at it or run away, but to run towards people and to see how they can be helpful. So we're either going to take care of other people or we're going to try to form alliances with other people. And it's not that either are right or wrong because they're all necessary in different circumstances. But a lot of that is how we're kind of hardwired and how we train, that women are trained more that it's okay to nurture, to collaborate, to have more conversation. And a lot of men are trained that they have to, fight, battle. And if you can't fix it, there's probably nothing you can do. So you should avoid it. And it's important to think about that because some of that's hardwired and some of it's trained. So you asked, why is it so hard? I mean, it seems so simple in theory,
Mhm.
but there are triggers that we all have, especially emotionally, with our parents, with locations, with something our boss might say. There's so many emotional triggers that we have been reacting to for such a long period of time. You're talking about completely reorganizing the system. Now, if you had a baby or a small child, it'd be easy to help to kind of shape them in this way, to not be triggered this way, to not react this way. But we're having to reverse a lot of hard work. And so most people, honestly, they have so much stress in their lives they can't get the quick trade-off. So let's say meditation, for example. We know that meditation really helps to calm the nervous system, focus the mind, all of these great things. Most of my clients, when they try to meditate, feel more anxious than when they're not meditating because now they're just listening to the voices in their head that are telling them they should be doing something else. This is a waste of time. This is never going to help, whatever. So we know that there's ways to rewire that. We have biofeedback technology that people can look at and utilize to help guide them and see, oh, I am getting better. This is helping me out. They're getting that positive reward. It's almost like working with a child to
Mhm.
that standpoint, because it's just so, so ingrained. And unfortunately, I have found that organizations want to spend a lot more time on time management, processes, policies, trainings, which again are all super important. But you have to think about the human on the other side that's getting that. Are they retaining it? And are they going to actually be able to replicate it when they really need to? And I think that's where we fall short sometimes.
I remember when I first started meditating many years ago, I had that same issue. The voices in my
Mhm.
head, this
For
is
sure.
stupid. This is never going to fix anything. But then the more I did it and the more I read, it's that's okay. That's natural. You're not
Absolutely.
doing something wrong if those thoughts come in your head.
Yeah.
Just start it where you can. Go if you're breathing meditation. Go back to your breathing. Just reconcentrate. Acknowledge that. Yeah, I'm thinking. I've strayed off the path. Okay, let's get back on the path.
And it's
You know,
just information,
yeah, and
and again, I kind of think, and I may have showed you this on one of the previous, I have this little monkey, and if you squeeze him, his heart pops out, and I
oh
give
yeah,
him out in some of my sessions. But it reminds me, we have this kind of monkey mind mentality.
mm,
So I started to befriend that voice, because usually what it's trying to do is protect us. But in trying to protect us, it's actually sabotaging us, right? So I didn't sleep well last night. I wake up in the morning, I had planned to work out, and the voice starts saying, oh, you can just do it tomorrow. Don't worry about it today. You've been working really hard. In fact, you deserve an extra glass of wine tonight when you come home. It's trying to comfort, it's trying to protect us, because if we don't have enough energy, we don't have a lot to spend. But what it's not doing is saying, remember last week when you didn't want to go to the gym and you said you were just going to do 5 minutes? Remember how much better you felt the rest of the day? Maybe this is a new pattern that would be helpful for you. That's the rational part of your brain. And so to me, using humor with kind of that monkey mind part and noticing, that's a lot of what meditation is just noticing, oh, there's the voice. But I can choose if I'm going to follow that voice or if I want to make a different decision. And same thing, if we're training for resiliency, disaster situations, how powerful would it be? And I know this may sound a little bit more deep than most people want to go, but if someone in that situation was able to say, wait a second, that's the voice, I'm going to decide to do something different. I'm not going to attack or whatever that situation might be. I'm not going to run away. I'm actually going to pause for a second. There's a place we trained that I'm supposed to go to check in with this. Now you've got the whole community working together, but that pause is something that we have to train.
and that really works, and it works in an office place too, because I've been on calls, Zoom calls, of course, with today's work environment, or in a
Yeah.
meeting room where you really do just want to jump out and say something. But if
Yeah.
you actually do have control of that inner voice and the monkey mind, you are able to, no, okay, let's see it for what it really is.
Yeah.
This is what I need to say, not the emotional, you know, and then just letting things that you don't mean come flying out of your mouth.
And
It's more
yeah,
controlled.
and that brings up for me something I think is super critical for your audience. And we may get into this more later, but that is, how does the organization support that? This is where I think leadership is critical. Because if we're all in a Zoom meeting, I can tell you right now, I might have a lot of things that are very insightful. I've taken my pauses, but everybody's on to the like 5 things from now because we're just boom, 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 boom. I think that leaders need to be very mindful of creating space, making sure to actually say, everyone's going to have 90 seconds, but first we're going to take 30 seconds to think about what's the most important thing you could say in the next 90 seconds. Now, I know that may sound almost like we're teaching kindergartners, but the reality is that people do need quiet space to reflect. and then they can decide if they have something to share. But you have a lot of more introverted, emotionally sensitive people with brilliant minds who just start to shut down because they can never get a word in edgewise. So we're always on this kind of hyper, what,
Yeah.
it just, it's not as effective.
On that note, we've come to the end of our first segment. Today, we're talking with Dr. Heidi Hanna about stress mastery for systemic resilience, and we will be right back. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.